Blog Talk Radio.
Warning, the following program may include profane language, controversial viewpoints, and perspectives on the true nature of reality so far removed from the status quo, they'll make your head spin like a top. Young children, corporate executives, and religious fundamentalists should turn away now.
Salam, Planet Earth. Welcome to Extraordinary Year. I'm Tim Bravo. Thanks for joining us tonight. T-minus 51 days until December 21st, 2012. Our guest tonight is Dr. Paul Connett, Executive Director of the Fluoride Action Network. He holds a Ph.D. in chemistry, was a professor of environmental chemistry and toxicology for more than 2 decades, and has co-written a book on fluoride called The Case Against Fluoride, How Hazardous Waste Ended Up in Our Drinking Water, and the Bad Science and Powerful Politics That Keep It There. He came to my personal attention through the newly released documentary, An Inconvenient 2. And if you haven't checked that out, you should really go check that out. Anyway, we've got a true life activist hero here, kids. He travels the globe, fighting back the push for fluoridation wherever it rears its head. And so it is that he's in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas tonight, where he just finished giving a 2-hour public speech against fluoridation. Wichita will be voting on fluoridation next Tuesday in the general election. Welcome, Dr. Connett, and thanks for being so giving with your time tonight.
Well, thank you, Tim, for having me on.
So how do you feel tonight's speaking event was received by the audience?
I think it went very well. I think people were there. Unfortunately, I don't think we got many people there that are pro-fluoridation to really challenge some of the points I was making, which is unfortunate. It's like clapping with one hand. It's like shadow boxing all the time. I wrote this book, you mentioned it, with 2 other authors. It understated rather than overstated the case against fluoride. Every single fact and argument in that book is backed up with references to the scientific literature, 80 pages in all. And that was published in October of 2010 by Chelsea Green. And we all hoped, that it would raise the level of the debate, that the proponents would face up to the fact that there was a lot of science which did not support their case, and that they would respond, challenge some of the things that we were saying, and generally the overall debate the quality would improve. But instead of doing that, they've completely ignored the book. After 2 years, they haven't produced a single scientific response to the book, and I think that's rather sad. But meanwhile, they still continue to go on public platforms, the promoters, saying it's safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. In fact, they say safe and effective so many times on a public platform, I'm beginning to wonder if they're not on a commission, that each time they use those words, there's another $100 into their coffers. I'm joking, of course, but they use it so many times.
Well, and I do want to, in a little bit, get to who's behind this push and the why, but I wanted to talk about your time in Wichita real quick. You've been here for the past couple of days, speaking in front of, you're also speaking in front of the county commission tomorrow morning, aside from the speech that you gave tonight. And so you've kind of been blitzing town. How is this compared to other towns that you've gone through? How is Wichita's response? How do we compare?
Pretty well, I think. I think first of all, the audiences have been enthusiastic. I've spoken 5 times now, in 2 health stores and 3 public meetings, and 1 at the university. Although I was sad that the professional health people and the science people shunned me. They would not entertain. They wouldn't provide a room for a talk on fluoridation. Too controversial for them, which is extraordinary for a university. Nothing should be too controversial for a university, especially when...
But local business is tied in pretty heavily to the universities here.
Really. Well, that's pretty sad, and it doesn't say well by your academic institutions that they should let that happen. An ugly fact can destroy a beautiful theory. So you can't put a fence around a policy and say it's inviolate, that it cannot be challenged. You've got to meet all challenges, especially as this is a practice which is being forced on people, foisted on the public. I'm not asking for my water to be fluoridated, but they want to put it in. And if you're the person that wants to put the fluoride in, you better be willing to defend it against all comers. Now, a few days ago, Dr. Mars, William Mars, who was the former chief of the Oral Health Division of the Center for Disease Control, which is the big promoting government agency behind fluoridation. And at the end of his talk, he was asked would he come back and debate Dr. Connett, who was coming to Wichita. And he said, no, he's a brilliant debater. I've only spoken in public 6 times, and I don't feel I can stand up to him in a debate. Well, fair enough, except it's his practice. He should be able to defend against anyone. But then he went on to say that I was the leader of misinformation in the United States on this practice. And I think that's outrageous. Not only he refuses to debate me, which is bad enough, but then to sling arrows at my reputation against my integrity, because I don't misinform anybody. I don't have any agenda. I don't have an axe to grind. I am just presenting science, the best science I know, on this issue to the public, in the public's interest, in the community's interest. And for him to turn around and accuse me of misinformation, of only doing this to sell a book, which I think is a real cheap shot. But if he really genuinely believes that I'm misinforming the public, then he should really feel obliged, wouldn't you think, to go on a public platform and give chapter and verse. He heard me give a 45-minute presentation of the National Research Council in 2003 before they published their massive 507-page review of fluoride in drinking water. So he heard me speak for 45 minutes. Where, Dr. Mars, did I misinform the NRC? He's also by now had 2 years to read my book. Where in our book do we misinform the public, Dr. Mars? And he must have had time to look at the health database of our webpage, fluoridealert.org, and to check that information out. Where is the misinformation there? Now, if there is misinformation there, and people are getting information from these sources every day around the world, he should be obliged to correct them. But I think, of course, there isn't misinformation. They all make mistakes, but there is no deliberate misinformation there, and I think it's disgusting that this man who's now working for Pew Charitable Trust, who's behaving like an outright propagandist, not a scientist, only qualifications are dental, which applies, incidentally, to the whole of the Oral Health Division of the CDC. You know, when the public hears statements like the Center of Disease Control says that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, they probably have visions that this is the opinion of the 20,000 workers for the Center of Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, who have a whole range of expertise on medical issues and toxicology and risk assessment and so on. However, when you hear a statement of fluoridation from the CDC, it's from this one small division, the Oral Health Division, which William Mars headed up. It's 30 people. They're nearly all dentally trained. And their mission is to promote fluoridation. So when it comes to an objective assessment of the evidence of whether it works or the safety, they're not an objective source of information.
That's beautiful, and I think the fact that they're attacking you with nothing, repeatedly attacking you with nothing, is because they have nothing to attack you with.
Well, that is unfortunate. That is the case. That is the case, Tim, that the reason that they can't debate is they just don't have any science on their own side. In fact, you know, the place where you think they were strongest, which is the evidence that fluoridation actually reduces tooth decay, is actually their weakest. The evidence that fluoridation, swallowing fluoride, actually reduces tooth decay is extremely weak. And that was a surprise to us. We wrote 3 chapters on that. Chapters 6, 7, and 8 all deal with both the historical and the modern studies on so-called fluoridation's benefits. And we used their own studies to show that there is very little, if any, benefit from swallowing fluoride, which in a way is not surprising because there's not one single biological process in the body that needs fluoride. So why swallow it? It doesn't do you any good. And even they have now admitted that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical. It works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. And so once they admitted that, they should have stopped fluoridation immediately, because if it works on the outside of the tooth, you've got fluoridated toothpaste universally available. Brush it on your teeth and spit it out. This way, you avoid exposing every tissue in the body to a known toxic substance, and you avoid forcing it on people that don't want it. So you solve both the medical problem and the ethical problem in one simple, common sense strategy. Apply it topically, not through the water supply.
So do humans need fluoride at all? I mean, aside from what we come into contact with in the natural environment, do we need fluoride at all?
Absolutely not. There is no evidence that fluoride is a nutrient. The way you demonstrate that a substance is an essential nutrient is you starve the animal of that substance in its diet. If it's an essential nutrient, it will develop some kind of disease. No one has ever demonstrated any kind of disease or disorder due to a lack of fluoride. And tooth decay is not due to a lack of fluoride. Tooth decay is due to too much sugar and a poor diet and bacteria in the mouth, which are allowed to thrive. So, as I said, if fluoride has a beneficial effect, it is a topical one, and you don't need to swallow it. And therefore, there's no need to take all the risks that are now becoming apparent. When you swallow fluoride, at least 50% accumulates in your bones on a day-to-day basis. Eventually, it produces symptoms like arthritis, pains in the joints, and if you continue to accumulate it in your bones, it makes the bones hard and brittle, and so we're concerned about an increased hip fracture. But the greatest concern today is that there are now 34, notice that, 34 studies from China, India, Iran, and Mexico, which indicate an association with fairly modest exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ in children. And the latest study, done by Ding and others, showed that children drinking between 0.3 and 3 parts per million of fluoride in the water, which overlaps the range which we fluoridate in the United States, which is 0.7 to 1.2, those children had lowered IQ, which correlated with the concentration of fluoride in their urine. Now, the concentration of fluoride in the urine is an indirect measure of how much fluoride the children have taken in each day. So the higher the level of fluoride in the urine in this study, the lower the IQ. And that is taking place in the range of 0.3 to 3 parts per million of fluoride in the drinking water. And clearly, there is no margin of safety to protect all of American children from lowered...
If I wanted to find that study that you were just talking about, where would I look?
It's on our webpage. It's called Ding et al. All the studies that I've mentioned are on our webpage, fluoridealert.org. Look under brain. In fact, the masthead, there are 4 mastheads revolving, I don't know what the technical term is, but the revolving heading of the homepage.
You guys really do have a fantastic website, I have to say.
Well, that's my son. My son is the Michael. Spent many, many years producing that website, and then just recently, since March of this year, updating it completely. A marvelous website. It really, really is. It's the best in the world. It's the most extensive database for health effects that you can possibly find. So that's when it's very painful when you get people like William Mars turning around and saying we are misinforming the public. We have more information on fluoride than the CDC has ever put together.
Dr. Connett, how did we get saddled with this practice to begin with?
Well, you know, it's there are 2 strains of thought here. There is the dental explanation, and there's the possible industrial explanation. The dental, and probably good intentions. In 1931, 3 independent researchers finally nailed what it was that was causing discoloration of the teeth in places like Colorado and Texas. Texas brown, Colorado stain. They finally found that was fluoride. And the dentists that did these studies were surprised that although the teeth looked rotten, awful, black, stained, brown, they didn't find very much tooth decay amongst these children. And so they wondered whether or not there was a level of fluoride that would produce only mild, what we now call dental fluorosis, discoloration, mottling the enamel caused by fluoride, that there would be a level of fluoride that would only produce the most mildest form of dental fluorosis, but also reduce tooth decay. And then in 1942, Trendy Dean of the U.S. Public Health Service produced this study, the famous 21-city study, which purports to show that as the fluoride level in the water goes up, tooth decay goes down, and he claimed that at 1 part per million was like, that was where it more or less plateaued out, and it was also the point at which above 1 part per million dental fluorosis rates increased quite significantly. So that 1 part per million was supposed to be the optimal level for fluoridation to fight tooth decay.
And what do we have now?
Well,
in most communities,
we have the CDC reports in 2010 that 41% of children aged 12 to 15 now have dental fluorosis. They wanted only 10%, they got 41%. So we're grossly overexposing our children to fluoride from all kinds of sources which weren't available when they started the trials in 1945. And it's not all in the very mild. 8.6% have a condition in which 50% of the enamel is impacted and are the 2 worst teeth, and 3.6% have moderate or severe, where 100% of the tooth enamel are being impacted. And that's an average of children living in fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. So the rate or the prevalence in fluoridated communities is probably over 50% now. And the rate of the moderate and severe could be higher as well. So this is not good news. Now, first of all, it's not good news for the children that have mild or moderate dental fluorosis, for the 10% that have one of those conditions. Not good for them. Psychological effects, children not wanting to smile, not wanting to speak too much on their first date, that kind of thing. There's psychological damage there. But it's worse than that, because it would be a biochemical miracle if the fluoride could damage the growing tooth cells, which is a systemic effect, an internal effect, not an external effect. So the damage to teeth is systemic. The benefit to teeth is topical. So swallowing the fluoride produces a systemic effect on the teeth, the growing tooth cells. It would be a biochemical miracle if it left untouched all the other cells, the developing cells of the tissues of a developing baby. And I'm concerned about the impact on the brain, and I've mentioned these 34 IQ studies, and we also have animal studies, and also damage to the bone, damage to the endocrine system. But the gamble that was taken in 1950, when the U.S. Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation in 1950, was that the only damage that fluoride would cause would be this dental fluorosis, and it wouldn't be noticed by parents or the children themselves. Now, that was a gamble, a huge gamble. And you have to wonder why the U.S. Public Health Service took that gamble in 1950, because none of the trials that had started in 1945 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Newburgh, New York, and Evanston, Illinois, none of those trials had been completed. They were all 10 or 15-year trials. And there were practically no health studies have been published in the scientific literature in 1950. So that's why people get suspicious that there was more to it than just this good intentions as far as the dental research people were concerned. What else was driving this? Because that was not a scientific decision. That was clearly a political decision in 1950. Now, there are two explanations which have been offered for this premature endorsement. One is the sugar lobby, with 133 different sugar interests making up the Sugar Research Foundation, announced in its newsletter that they needed to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. They then proceeded to spend millions of dollars financing nutrition departments in different universities in the United States. and scientists like Dr. Fred Astaire, who became the director of the nutrition department, chairman of the nutrition department at Harvard, to support them, extolling the virtues of sugar, telling the public and Congress that Coca-Cola was a nutritious drink, that cookies and candies were, part of the nutrition, and also extolling the virtues of fluoridation. So clearly, the sugar industry has an invested interest in water fluoridation. Whether or not they were involved in getting the U.S. Public Health Service to endorse fluoridation 1 year later in 1950, I don't know. No one's ever joined those dots. Meanwhile, Chris Bryson, a former BBC producer and correspondent, has spent 10 years writing a book called The Fluoride Deception. And what Chris did in a brilliant book was to show the collusion between the U.S. Public Health Service and industries that were producing fluoride, using fluoride, contaminating the environment, facing many lawsuits from farmers who'd had their cattle, etc., poisoned by fluoride, and obviously very, very concerned about future lawsuits from their workers who were being heavily exposed to fluoride in industries such as the aluminum industry, where an enormous amount of fluoride is used in the production of aluminium and in the released in the process into the environment, into the potting lines and so on. And I've seen some of these workers, and some of those workers today cannot lift their arms above their shoulders because the fluoride is eaten away at the connective tissue. So I think there was a huge concern about liabilities from fluoride. This is, remember, the period that we're talking about is post-World War II, and the support for fluoridation emerged during World War II. It was also the time when a huge amount of fluoride is being used by the nuclear industry to separate the uranium isotopes. You separate uranium-235 from 238 by converting the uranium into uranium hexafluoride, which is a gas, and then you separate the two isotopes by diffusion. And a huge amount of fluoride was used in that process. And probably a huge amount of fluoride pollution was generated at that time. A huge amount of fluoride waste was also produced. And in fact, the chief toxicologist of the Manhattan Project was very much involved in the planning of one of the fluoridation trials. And one of their interests appears to have been for the nuclear industry to have had information about low-level effects of fluoride to equip them to deal with lawsuits that might accrue in the future. That was Dr. Harold Hodge, incidentally, who became the guru of toxicology and the safety of fluoride. He was the one that told everybody that fluoride at 1 part per million was completely safe. In fact, you can see black and white films of a rather handsome young man in front of a blackboard saying 1 part per million of fluoride is safe, and we shouldn't delay fluoridation any longer. And that clip you can see in a videotape called Professional Perspectives on Water Fluoridation, which is available on a webpage, fluoridealert.org. Just go there and click on videos. It's the first video you get to. You will also find, incidentally, an interview I had with Chris Bryson. So if you don't want to spend all the time to read his book, which I hope you do, you could watch the 28-minute videotape I have with Chris.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend listeners go check out the website, because there's good content there, and it's presented well, and you'll find what you're looking for. So I guess that kind of gets behind how it might have gotten started between a sugar lobby or maybe a nuclear lobby needing to get rid of waste material. But why are they still, is it the same reasons? Is that why they're still pushing so hard? Because somebody is really pushing hard to fluoridate.
Oh, yes. They are pushing hard. And I tell you, one of the struggles I've had for 16 years is, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this when the evidence that it works is so weak and the evidence that it causes harm is growing, and they are doing it despite the fact that it's a violation of the individual's right to informed consent to medication. What is driving this? On the face of it, it's incredibly arrogant what they're doing. They won't defend it in public debate. As I said, the scientific evidence is extremely weak. They can't even put a response in writing to our book after 2 years. So what is driving it? Well, there's one clue, Tim, that the forces that started it may still be out there, that the aluminum industry, the oil industry, the steel industry, the ceramic industry, the brick industry, all the industries which produce a lot of fluoride pollution may still be involved, because one of the organizations which is vitriolic in its attack of anybody that opposes fluoridation and wildly enthusiastic about supporting fluoridation is the American Council on Science and Health, ACSH. This is Elizabeth Whalen's group, and they have never found a chemical that they didn't like. They are funded up and down by the chemical industry, all kinds of industries fund this. Industrial front. It sounds as if it might be some independent body concerned about health, American Council on Science and Health, but it is a lobby in defense of essentially pollution from industry. And they are in there attacking anybody that opposes fluoridation. For example, when Peter Vallone Jr., a councilman in New York City, proposed a bill to stop fluoridation in New York City, they went after him. They wrote such an insulting piece against this man for having the temerity to do it, you know, using the tin hat idea that he's flaky, flat earth society, crazy, unscientific, emotional, all the standard rubbish that they say about anybody that opposes fluoridation. So the American Council of Science and Health is still in there. You know, I mentioned Fred Stair. Fred Stair was on the board of directors of the American Council on Science and Health. Back in 1990, when the National Toxicology Program finally produced the cancer study on animals and found that fluoride increased osteosarcoma in male rats, and there was a front page coverage.
Bone cancer?
Yes, cancer in bone cancer in rats. When this produced quite a furor in the media, and the ACSH had a press conference in which they threatened legal action against the EPA if they reclassified fluoride as a possible potential carcinogen.
Oh.
And Fred Stair was right in there, talking about the wonders of fluoridation. Fred Stair went way beyond. Remember Fred Stair? He's the sugar lobbyist. Right. He went way beyond most people, the pro-fluoridation. Not only did he claim that fluoride was wonderful for teeth, he thought it was even better for adults. He thought that fluoride protected our bones, that would protect older people from hip fractures, etc., etc. Very opposite, of course. And that's often an industrial ploy. If you get a study about a chemical pollutant, and the study finds that this pollutant causes problem X, a short time later, industry will produce a study which says that this pollutant is actually protective against X. The very opposite. You stake out the utter opposite territory, and the only reason to do that is to confuse the public, to try to neutralize. You try to neutralize every scientist that says something is bad, every study that says something bad, with another study which says it's good. And in that state of confusion, they can continue to peddle their wares, as it were.
And in fact, we actually in Wichita are lucky enough to have an opportunity at least to vote on it.
Absolutely.
Not that it's a guaranteed, not that we're guaranteed we're going to be fluoride free in a week, but at least we get to vote.
Yeah, and of course the councillors in the councillors in Wichita made that possible. They said, we're not going to vote it in. The pro-fluoridation people would have loved the council just voted in unilaterally, but the council said, no, we're going to put this to referendum. In Portland, the 5 commissioners there, the councillors, they voted it in without virtually no input from the public. But the good news is the citizens immediately turned around and in 30 days, actually less than 30 days, they needed 19,000 signatures to get this on the ballot. And they actually got 43,000 signatures, so I think they've got enough to get that on the ballot. And I'm pretty confident that the citizens of Oregon will vote out fluoridation for the fourth time. But you know, that's putting the democratic process to some stress for a number of people to drop everything for 30 days to go out and raise 43,000 signatures just to keep this poison out of the drinking water.
So true. You mentioned earlier effects on the endocrine system, and there's a particular endocrine gland that is my favorite, and that's the pineal gland.
Yep.
And I have read evidence, although I didn't check the study, to say that fluoride actually speeds up calcification of the pineal gland. Is that something that you've heard about?
Well, I think that may be an extrapolation from the work. I know this work very well because I know the author. I've known her for years. It's Dr. Jennifer Luke, who's actually a dentist in England. And she did her PhD thesis at the University of Surrey in Guildford. And what she did, well, first of all, she conjectured that fluoride would accumulate in the pineal gland because the pineal gland is outside, it's between the 2 hemispheres of the brain, but it's outside the blood-brain barrier. So fluoride can't get across the blood-brain barrier. We don't think so. But the pineal gland is outside, so it could get in. Secondly, the pineal gland has a very high perfusion rate of blood, so a lot of it could get in. And thirdly, it's a calcifying tissue, like the bones, laying down crystals of calcium hydroxyapatite. And she reasoned then that this would be like a magnet for fluoride. And she was surprised that when she went to the literature that nobody had looked. So she got the pineal glands from 11 corpses from a London hospital. And sure enough, when she analyzed the level of fluoride in these crystals, it was astronomical. The average was 9,000 parts per million, but it went up to as high as 21,000 parts per million. And to put that into perspective, that is more fluoride in the pineal gland than you get in the bones of somebody that succumbs to crippling skeletal fluorosis. So this little gland has probably some of the highest concentrations of fluoride in the body. And that was published, that report was published in 2001. And the other part of her thesis is yet to be published. What she did then was to treat animals with fluoride, high dose and low dose animals, and the Mongolian gerbil is the animal of choice. It's the closest to the human as far as the structure of these crystals. And she found that the high-dosed animals had lower production of melatonin. And that is the very important hormone, which acts like a biological clock. It times all kinds of things, like the onset of puberty, aging, possibly involved in cancer, jet lag, sleep patterns, and so on. It responds to light and dark. It only produces melatonin at night. Sometimes the melatonin is called the hormone of darkness. Descartes referred to the pineal gland as the seat of the soul. It's the third eye. It's the third eye. It's a fascinating little tissue.
Doesn't it actually have photoreceptors? It's an actual, almost like a retina inside that thing, right?
Well, I don't know. You're going beyond my biology here. All I know is it responds to light. It does not produce melatonin during the night, during the light time. It's only at nighttime. And a circadian rhythm, follows the circadian rhythm. And when she measured the melatonin in these animals, it's smoothly, you could see the reductions were so smooth, comparing the high fluoride and the low fluoride animals. And also, what was important is that the animals with the lower melatonin production, as you might expect, reached puberty earlier. It's thought that the melatonin levels are highest in children, and as the melatonin levels fall at a certain point, that's the point where you trigger the production of the sex hormones, and that's when puberty begins. So if you lower the melatonin levels, you would anticipate a shortening time to puberty. And then one of the extraordinary things that when Jennifer Luke continued to search the literature on this issue, she found a paper published in 1956, and it was the first trial of fluoridation. That was the Newburgh-Kingston trial, which actually looked at the health of children. And one of the things that they found in this study, Newburgh-Kingston, is that the young girls in the fluoridated community were reaching menstruation on average 5 months earlier than the young girls in the non-fluoridated community called Kingston. And they didn't think that was significant at the time, but now in the context of Jennifer Luke's work, it is significant. Now, I made her PhD thesis available to several federal agencies in this country, and by now everybody must know that they exist, but not one single fluoridating country has attempted to reproduce her studies. And they're not difficult. They could easily do it. But not one country has attempted to reproduce these studies. Or if they have, they've kept it quiet. They're not publishing them.
They know what they found. Doesn't look good.
And so the attitude in the United States and other fluoridating countries is they essentially seem to be working backwards. If a study finds harm, then it's a junk science. If a scientist opposes fluoridation, he's crazy. And the way you protect this program is that you simply don't do the studies. And then you claim, well, we've been fluoridating for 50 or 60 years and we don't see any harm. Well, of course you're not going to see any harm if you don't look. If you don't look, you're not going to find. And they're assuming that the absence of study is the same thing as the absence of harm. Now, okay, so for years and years and years, they don't do the fundamental studies. They don't, for example, do basic things like actually measure the fluoride in the bones of the American public on a systematic basis to see how much fluoride accumulates in the human bone after you've lived in a fluoridated community 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. None of that. None of the basic sciences being done. But what's shocking and more shocking is today the studies are being done in India and China, Iran and Mexico and other countries which have high natural levels of fluoride. They're very concerned about what this fluoride is doing. And so they're doing lots and lots of studies. And instead of seeing these studies, the 34 studies on IQ is one example. Instead of attempting to reproduce those studies in the United States or Australia or New Zealand or wherever they've fluoridated, they're not doing the studies. They're not reproducing them. Instead, they criticize the methodology. And I say, look, if you're so good at methodology, then design a study, a good study, and show us that everything's okay. But no, they just want to cut their cake and keep it. They want to criticize the methodology of any study that causes harm, but they don't want to produce what they consider to be a good study to demonstrate that everything's hunky-dory. And in fact, it's very clear to me now that the studies that actually have found harm have superior methodology to the studies that they use that claim benefit. They've never done a double-blind, what do they call it, clinical trial, a randomized clinical trial, RCT, randomized clinical trial. They've never done a randomized clinical trial to demonstrate either fluoride's effectiveness or its safety. And the reason that they've been able to get away with that is that the Food and Drug Administration, you know, I was at college with John Cleese. I played soccer with John Cleese, and sometimes I think I've been trapped in a series of Monty Python episodes for the last 16 years pursuing this business, because it's extraordinary to me, some of the things which have gone on. And where was I before I mentioned John Cleese? I was talking about, what was it now?
The randomized clinical trial.
Oh yeah, okay. So the Food and Drug Administration has never regulated fluoride for ingestion, either as a pill or in the water. And it's the official classification of fluoride, according to the FDA, is it's, quote, an unapproved drug. It's never gone through an approval process, and yet it's the most prescribed drug in American history. It's going today to over 200 million people in their drinking water every day, and we have the FDA has never regulated. And there's not one, to make matters worse, there's not one federal agency that accepts any kind of legal responsibility for fluoridation.
Dr. Connett, you've got to lead with that stuff. I think that would hit home to some Americans.
Yeah. Well, let's go through those agencies. The FDA doesn't regulate fluoride, the one that you would expect to be regulating this. The EPA regulates contaminants, but not additives to water. Contaminants, okay. And so they have within their power to end fluoridation if they were to do honest science. If they were to look at the endpoints in the National Research Council's report of 2006, if they were to look at those endpoints and apply the standard risk assessment procedures using safety margins, the safe level for drinking water would be far less than 1 part per million, which would end fluoridation completely. They just won't do that science. They're just dragging their feet, and I guess they will keep dragging their feet. So that's the EPA. Now, as far as the CDC is concerned, I've mentioned there's only one entity at the CDC interested in fluoridation. That's the Oral Health Division, and they just promote it. There's no one at the CDC that has the task of maintaining an overview of the safety of the practice, and they certainly don't accept responsibility.
Culture now.
Sorry?
That culture has been with them for decades now, and you're not going to move that stone, at least not easily.
No, it's become a sacred cow of the dental associations, the medical associations, and umpteen professional bodies, none of whom are doing any decent research on the issue.
I know you have 3 big examples of people who used to be major proponents of fluoridation and then switched sides. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, I would say the first person and one of the most impressive people I've ever interviewed is John Cahoon. John Cahoon was the former chief dental officer of Auckland, New Zealand. And he was an avid promoter of fluoridation, both as a dental officer and as a counselor. He was on the council. And he was very effective. And he was so effective that they decided to send John around the world in 1980 on a tour to collect the information once and for all that demonstrated that fluoridation was very effective. He went to Australia, went to Asia, went to North America, went to Europe. And he talked to all the leading researchers behind the scenes. And they all told him, to his utter chagrin, that they were not finding any difference in tooth decay between fluoridated communities and non-fluoridated communities. He came back to New Zealand, where he found on his desk a big report marked confidential. And in that were the statistics of all the tooth decay of all 12-year-olds and 5-year-olds in New Zealand. And when he looked at it again, he found no difference in tooth decay. If there's any difference at all, the teeth of the children in the non-fluoridated cities were better than the teeth of the children in the fluoridated cities. He didn't do anything directly, but when his assistants brought to him pictures of horrible dental fluorosis, he decided to act, and he went to the TV stations and changed his mind in public and spent the rest of his life trying to undo the damage that he'd done. He wrote a PhD thesis on the whole issue, and in that research, he turned up the fact that the first trial in New Zealand was fraud, absolute fraud. What they did in this trial in New Zealand, which was in Hastings, with the control city was Napier, after about a year into the study, they found that the tooth decay in Napier, the control city, was actually slightly better than the tooth decay in Hastings. So they quickly made an excuse and dropped the control city. So instead of comparing the tooth decay in the exposed population and the control, they looked at the tooth decay at the beginning of the trial and the end of the trial. But the trouble here, and this is where the fraud comes in, they changed the method of diagnosing the tooth decay in this trial, and it was less stringent at the end than or more stringent, whatever the word is. Anyway, it meant that the so-called reduction in tooth decay was simply an artifact of changing the methodology. And what makes it fraud is that the authors did not indicate in their report that they had changed the method of diagnosing, analyzing tooth decay.
How was that discovered?
That was discovered in the, oh my goodness, it must have been in the, I know there was an article written about this in the colleges. It was certainly covered in his PhD thesis, so this would certainly be, I would say, in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. I interviewed him in 1997, I think. The second person of huge note was Dr. Hardy Lineback, who was spokesman for fluoridation for the Canadian Dental Association. He was also the president of the Canadian Association for Dental Researchers. He has both a PhD and a DDS, and is considered to be one of the leading dental researchers in Canada. And he started to read the literature. He was appalled that we are using hazardous waste to fluoridate. We use chemicals derived from the scrubbing system of the phosphate fertilizer industry to fluoridate water. Industrial grade chemicals contaminated with, amongst other things, with arsenic. So inevitably you increase the cancer rates in the United States and elsewhere simply by the fact that you're using fluoridated chemicals contaminated by arsenic. But anyway, he was appalled by this, and he changed his position in public, and he didn't benefit his career. He was told at one point he didn't get promotion because of his involvement in the fluoridation issue, which is pretty sad response from academia. And I guess there are others that have been very courageous. I think the late Richard Fulks was a medical advisor to the British Columbia government, and he handed on to the government the advice based upon what he was told by his assistants that fluoridation was a good way to go. And it was only later that he read the literature himself, and he was appalled that he'd been trapped into promoting this thing when it wasn't justified. And he changed his position and was very, very active trying to fight fluoridation worldwide.
And you've been at it for quite a while, too. When did you start fighting fluoridation?
I didn't want the issue, Tim. I didn't want the issue. I've been working on waste management for 27 years, and that's my first love. And it's taken me to 55 different countries, and I'm very excited about the latest phase of this waste management, which is zero waste for sustainability. It's the most practical thing. Working on waste is the most practical way that the ordinary citizen can get involved in the movement towards sustainability. That's my first love. Now, in 1996, I was still trying to balance the demands of teaching chemistry full-time at a university and continuing to help communities around the world on waste management, and particularly in those times, fighting incinerators, promoting recycling, composting, reuse, repair, etc., etc., etc. It was difficult balancing that. It was taking nearly every weekend, nearly every holiday, nearly every break involved travel to somewhere. 49 states in the United States and eventually 55 other countries. So when my wife put a bunch of papers on my desk and said, dear, would you read these? And I said, what is it? And she said, water fluoridation. I said, take that away. These people are crazy. I didn't want a third issue, and I certainly didn't want a third issue that would stigmatize me as Looney Tunes, which is the prevailing attitude in the United States. But when I started reading what she put on my desk, I was appalled, absolutely appalled and embarrassed that I had gone along with this nonsense that the people opposed to fluoridation were crazy people, when in fact some very distinguished scientists in history have opposed fluoridation. Most of the countries in the world do not fluoridate their water. Nobel Prize winners have opposed fluoridation. The first opponents of fluoridation in the United States were biochemists who'd used fluoride to poison enzymes. The Nobel Prize winners in enzyme chemistry, like Summers from Cornell, opposed fluoridation. So, anyway, a bit of embarrassment. But then there were a couple of things which shocked me and disturbed me. One was that the fluoride, or whilst it was pretty stable chemically, biologically it was extremely active. It poisoned enzymes I've mentioned, it interfered with G proteins, interfered with hydrogen bonding and so on. You very quickly, as a biochemist, you don't want that stuff anywhere near your tissues. And the second thing, which was the real giveaway for me, was the level of fluoride in mother's milk, breast milk. And that level was 0.004 parts per million. Now remember, we fluoridate in the United States between 0.7 and 1.2. So when a parent bottle feeds their baby in a fluoridated community in the United States, they're giving their baby up to 300 times more fluoride than nature intended for the baby. Or more simply, a bottle-fed baby is going to get 300 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby. Now, I don't think nature screws up like that. I don't believe for one moment that a bunch of dentists in Chicago called the ADA knows more about what the baby needs in its first meal than nature, evolution, call it what you want, determined. I think it's highly likely that the baby does not need fluoride, and that goes back to an earlier part of the discussion where there's absolutely no evidence that fluoride is a nutrient. So the baby does not need fluoride, and we say in England, we're on a hiding to nothing if we swallow fluoride. It can do you no good to swallow fluoride. It may do you harm. So why on earth do it? So it was very quick. It's very easy for me to say this is a foolish practice. And then you can bolster this with more common sense. It's a lousy way to do medicine. If you put a medicine in the drinking water, you can't control the dose. You can't control who gets it. You violate the individual's right to informed consent. So there are many common sense arguments that buttress this notion that nature never intended the baby to get fluoride, or not much fluoride.
Well, and you've been through this fight in so many communities. What's the best way, in your experience, that fluoride opponents can get other people to stop and look at these dangers? Is there a kill shot?
We have packets of information which they can get from our campaign manager, Stuart Cooper. Go to our webpage and contact him. There's all kinds of advice we can give, all kinds of leaflets. In fact, the leaflets here in Wichita are very, very good. I'm very impressed. There's several groups fighting fluoridation, and between them, they produce some excellent leaflets responding to the other side and so on. So,
I would just like to point out that the Vote No logo that you'll find on those, I was honored to have a part in that. So
good for you. Good for you,
Tim. It's been a pleasure for me to see it all around.
Yeah, this is great. The buttons are great. That logo is excellent. The yard signs are good. You're up against big money here. There's a lot of money going into public relations and spin, bringing in people like Bill Maher of the Pew Charitable Trust and all these other heavily funded groups. But the truth is on the opponent's side. The science is on our side. And so it's just a question of how many people we can reach, or they can reach, in the 6 days remaining before the election. It's difficult if you don't have a lot of money to reach a huge number of people. And this has been a valiant effort over the last few days to try to get as many people coming to the food stores and the university meeting, and then tonight's meeting at the Murdoch Center. They're trying very, very hard to get people. But
I tell you what, Connett, we have, the group of people who have come together to fight this in our city, it's just completely energized me. We've so many talent. We might not have the money behind us, but we have a lot of talented, intelligent people who have come together to fight this here. Just people, just unsung heroes. I wasn't the only person on that art committee. I didn't want to give that impression. We had another very talented artist by the name of James Dean who collaborated with me on that. There's just a lot of unsung heroes who have really been fighting this, and I hope that after next week we can say that we won, and it's a testament to their fighting spirit.
This is good. I agree with you. I've been very impressed with the caliber of the people, lovely people that got together to fight this foolish practice, this foolish idea. I like to say that affecting change is like driving a nail through a piece of wood. The expert, someone like myself, comes in. All we can do is to sharpen the nail, give people the best information that we can. But what we can't do is we can't push that nail through the piece of wood. You need the hammer of public opinion to drive that nail home. And that's going to be at the ballot box on November 6th. And in those next 6 days, I urge anybody that's listening in the Wichita area, for goodness, or if you're living outside the Wichita area, contact anybody that you know in Wichita and encourage them to get them to vote no. It's got to be word of mouth. Talk to people. Talk to everybody. Wear the buttons. Use the button as a way of triggering a conversation. Have the leaflets in your pocket to give to the people once the conversation begins. However short it is, at least give them the leaflet. Use the web, use the Facebook and all those other things to communicate to hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And that's the way citizens are doing. In actual fact, I would say, Tim, that the reason fluoridation is going to fail in the next few years, it will collapse, is because of the Internet. The Internet has made all the information, all the science readily available. It's there at the touch of a button. You can get educated, and of course, anybody with an open mind who reads that literature is going to go one way. It's going to be opposed to fluoridation. There's very little science out there that gives any succor to those who think it's a good idea. So the Internet is going to make it possible. The good news is that since October 25th, 2010, when fluoridation met its Waterloo, it met its Waterloo in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, where the citizens voted in a referendum to stop fluoridation. Since then, over 70 communities in Canada, the United States, and New Zealand have stopped fluoridation. That's over 3 million people that have been liberated from this foolish practice.
Good word
and
for
that
it.
is why I think they're throwing so much money. The promoters are throwing an enormous amount of money into public relations and every other way of deceiving the public in Portland and Wichita. This is their fight back, that they are very frightened of this trend. I think they sense there's a row of dominoes falling over here. They're trying to reverse that trend, and the way they're doing it is to try to get fluoridation into Portland and Wichita. And the good side of that is if we stop them in Wichita, it will be a major, major defeat for the pro-fluoridation people, and will begin to accelerate, I think, the number of communities around the country that will stop fluoridation.
Hear that, Wichita? Do it for Wichita. Do it for the world. But let's say we lose. I don't want to think about it, but if it happens, what do we do? Well, is there a way to safely and cheaply remove fluoride from water?
No, you can't. You can't really protect yourself. I mean, I've been through this. I've lived in the town. It took us 7.5 years to get it out of the village of Canton after I'd got involved. It's July the 6th, 1996. It took us 7.5 years from that point to get it out of Canton. In that interim period, we were buying 5-gallon jugs of water from large store, putting it on a water tower, using that for drinking and cooking. But that didn't protect us because we're still using fluoridated water to water the garden. We're still bathing and showering in fluoridated water. And also, when we went downtown, every restaurant that we went to, the water was fluoridated. Every time we had a cup of coffee in a restaurant, a cup of tea, it was fluoridated. Every time we had soup, it was fluoridated. And when I went to work, every cup of coffee I had at work, and I drank a lot of coffee, it was fluoridated. When you went to a friend's house, it was fluoridated. Once it's in your drinking water, it's insidious. It's very, very difficult to protect yourself and your family from getting the fluoride. Very difficult and very expensive too. Just the first part, getting all that bottled water. And what's so ironic about this? They say they're doing this for poor families, for low-income families. But it's low-income families that can't afford the avoidance measures. And also, we know from studies in India that the most vulnerable people to fluoride toxicity are people with poor nutrition. Poor nutrition exacerbates fluoride toxicity. So if you're low in calcium, if you're low in vitamin C, you're low in some of the other vitamins, if you're low in protein, you are going to be more vulnerable to fluoride toxicity. And you're more likely to find poor nutrition in low-income families than other families. So the very community that they claim to want to help is the very community that's going to be trapped and hurt most by fluoride. One example of that is that black children and Mexican-American children have higher rates of dental fluorosis than white children. So this is an equity.
That's based on nutrition, basically, then.
Yeah. Okay. What I find pernicious here is that dentists claiming liberal support because they want to help poor families. At the same time, 80% of dentists in the United States do not treat children on Medicaid. So if they really want to help poor children, for goodness sake, give them treatment. What we should be doing, instead of frittering away money, putting an industrial-grade toxic chemical in the drinking water of everybody, we should be targeting children of low-income families with special attention, clinics, and better diet, education for better diet, cut out the sugar between meals and so on. And in fact...
there you go. You can't cut out sugar, though.
But you know, Wichita was actually a place where they did a lovely, not experiment, but a treatment process. June Allen, who sadly has passed away, I'm sad I never got to meet her. I spoke to her many times on the phone. June Allen, her husband's still alive, Phil Allen. He was a doctor. She was, I'm not sure what she was. I think she was a nurse. Anyway, she started a program in which... in primary school, children were given xylitol mints to suck on, or xylitol chewing gum. I think they had one mint in the morning, chewing gum in the afternoon. And this approach, to me, is much better. Certainly, xylitol is far less toxic than fluoride. And secondly, xylitol fights tooth decay by preventing the Streptococcus mutans, the bacteria that converts sugar into acid, which attacks the enamel. Xylitol prevents those bacteria from sticking to a surface, sticking to the tooth, sticking to the plaque. And if they can't stick to a surface, they do not survive in the oral cavity. And so this is a very nice way of getting rid of the bacteria without doing any harm to the human being. You have to eat a lot of xylitol before you get any bad effects like diarrhea. So it's not a good idea to make xylitol your sole sugar source. That's not a good idea, but a little amount in chewing gum or mints is good. And the kids enjoyed it. This program worked. And it was Wichita.
Huh. Well, we should be making a local hero out of her.
Absolutely. Her colleague, Dorothy is one of the organizers here in Wichita. Very nice woman, and I've enjoyed talking to her. She's been driving me around to the different meetings and so on. Tim, I'm getting a bit of an echo on this phone. Is it showing up on the airwaves?
It is not for me. It may be for listeners. It's something that we have experienced before. Generally goes away after a minute on its own. We hope.
We hope. Okay. So as long as it's not driving people batty.
But I don't hear it myself.
Okay.
So I was going to say, Dr. Connett, what's next? What's after Wichita? Win or lose?
Well, I've got a few days at home, and then I'm going down to Asheville, North Carolina, to help them try to get it out of the water there, getting it out, not stopping it going in, getting it out. And then I got a bit of a break until January. I should be going back to Italy for more waste work, and then in February, March to New Zealand to help fight to stop more communities from fluoridating there. As I said before, I think it's a race between Canada and New Zealand as to which country stops fluoridating first. Canada is very, very hopeful, so is New Zealand.
You're still active with the waste management thing as well, then?
Absolutely. I've just written a book on waste management called Zero Waste. A Revolution in Progress. This was in Italian. I wrote this with two other Italians.
Huh.
Yeah. The two most exciting places for zero waste are California and Italy. San Francisco has reached 80% diversion from landfills and incinerators, which is amazing. There's a city of 850,000, 80% diversion with source separation, recycling, composting, reuse, repair, waste reduction initiatives, and so on. Most exciting. And we've got communities in Italy over 90%, smaller communities. We've even got Naples to declare a zero-waste strategy. Over 100 communities in Italy have now adopted a zero-waste strategy. And for those who eyes are rolling thinking this is an impossible dream, let me explain. A community cannot get to zero waste by itself. You need a combination of community responsibility at the back end, the famous 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. But you also need industrial responsibility at the front end with redesign. We have to say to industry, if we can't reuse it, recycle it, or compost it, then you guys shouldn't be making it. We need better industrial design for the 21st century. So this is my first love, Tim. This is what I want to be talking about. It's very, very positive. I'm excited by it. It gives citizens a way of getting involved in sustainability. That's what I'd like to be spending 100% of my time on now that I've retired. And the sooner we can end this stupid practice of fluoridation, I can do that. Meanwhile, I feel trapped. I feel the burden of knowledge. I feel I've got to continue to help communities, but I don't enjoy it because I don't like shadow boxing. I don't like dealing with people that, on the one hand, are very, very confident in what they're doing, but completely lack confidence when it comes to defending their position in an open public debate.
Let me ask you this. Do you ever see somebody in audiences from town to town that looks familiar? Do you have any stalkers, followers? Do they just have paid shills following you around to?
No, I don't think anything like that. I think their attitude, rather than combat, is just to ignore us. Ignore us, we go away. Ignore the book, ignore the National Research Council report, ignore the 34 IQ studies. Just keep ignoring all the red flags that are being waved, warning that this practice is causing some harm.
Well, I have to say, for Wichita and for my children, for the children in other communities that you're going to be, maybe even central to stopping fluoridation in, we thank you for taking the time out from your first love to help protect this world for the rest of us. And that's why I personally consider you a hero, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. But, we need the fifth estate. We need
the journalism estate, yeah.
Yeah.
We do.
We need it desperately. One of the shockers in Wichita was to read the Wichita Eagle front page so-called news item, which was actually an editorial. Now, any newspaper has the right to a editorial position. They can be pro or anti anything. That's their prerogative. But it's completely unprofessional when the editorial position is put in as if it's a news article. That's unprofessional and unacceptable.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's kind of embarrassing. At the same time, I'd like to encourage you by letting you know that not too many people read that rag anymore.
Well, anyway, we need people like you getting the message out.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to be in this fight until next Tuesday, and after that, it's in the hands of the voters, and we'll move on from there. But I'm drinking non-fluoridated water tonight, and I'll be voting no.
Okie dokie.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
All right. Well, that was phenomenal and an honor for me. Very, very cool. I actually had another show lined up, and I was going to call it Read Between the Lines, but we've gone on over an hour. We're going on an hour 15 here, so I think I probably better wrap it up and let you guys get on with your lives. Thank you for listening in. If you're in Wichita, please, if you're still listening, I know you're going to go vote no, but please talk to other people. I've been telling people the first 5 minutes of the new documentary, An Inconvenient Tooth, which features Dr. Paul Connett, that first 5 minutes is all anyone needs to see. Just watch the first 5 minutes. Anyway, that's it for us tonight. And next week we will have Mellon Thomas Benedict, who is a fairly famous near-death experiencer, who's going to talk about his near-death experience and what was revealed to him while he was having his near-death experience about the times that we are living through now. So that's next week. Thanks for listening. Namaste, guys.